All right, good morning, DC agents in Remax Distinctive. This is Dan Bouchard Fernandez with Brokerage, and we are now joining in our conversation today on for required compliance. And we are talking about words that matter. This is a flyer that's put out by the Office of Human Rights in the District of Columbia. And you can find that in the link that will be provided at the uh, along with this class and the recording of this class. So if you want to see it, that's where it'll be found. You can also see it here in the link at the top of the page here. Um, and I will copy this and add this into our discussion. All right, so what we're going to be doing is Words That Matter, a guide to inclusive language around racial and ethnic identity. So there's a lot of preface to this, and I'm going to skip over most of the preface, and we're just going to jump right into some discussion points. So terms that we often use in our society that might have unintended compliance topics and implications to them. So terms like grandfather clause. Historically, grandfather clause referred to a set of voting laws around 1870 and 1890 that had the goal of excluding Black voters by conditioning the right to vote based on whether one's grandfather had voted in the past. This effectively denied Black men the right to vote since their grandfathers had been legally excluded from the right to vote prior to the enactment of the 15th Amendment. So we use grandfather clause a lot in our everyday vernacular. And so other terms that would be preferable to using when talking about grandfather clause would be inherited, a legacy rule, an inherited rule, an old rule, or a precedent. So just some food for thought. That's some good topics to go through there. Let's go on to the next one. No can do, long time no see. Both phrases are traced to the 19th century practice of mocking Asian immigrants or indigenous people for their pidgin English. And again, pidgin is not a pejorative term. It is an actual word that is intended to be used to describe non-fluency. So that's a good, no can do and long time no see. We use that very colloquially and very, very innocently, but it really does have its history in the Asian discrimination practices from the 19th century. So it's been a long while, and I can't do it. So I think those are the suggested terms. Just being aware of what the implications are to those terms is very important for us to know. Off the reservation. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the U.S. government established reservations to bring indigenous tribes under government control. Forced relocation led to devastating, long-lasting effects. In the 19th and 20th centuries, off the reservation was used to convey contempt and hatred for indigenous people who left the reservation. So again, we use that very innocently sometimes in our speech, but it does have some very negative implications. So instead of using that, we should choose words that mean words like overstepped, out of bounds, or walked out. So those are some other good terms. Uppity. We use that sometimes, right? Originated in a collection of Black American folk tales in the late 19th century, Uncle Remus and His Listener, and later evolved into a racist term as white Southerners began to use it to describe Black people who were viewed as not knowing their place because they felt Black people did not belong in a certain places in society. So that's the origin of uppity. So instead of using uppity, we could use words like arrogant, self-important, or pretentious. So that's a coded language kind of term. Illegal alien. The term alien was used as a non-derogatory term to describe someone as a foreigner dating as far back as the late 18th century. but probably an undocumented immigrant or an unauthorized immigrant is probably a better term for it. Let's see, inner city and urban. So when we're describing, different components of the city, after the large-scale migration of white Americans out of the inner cities in the 1950s and 70s, people of color were restricted to the cities of economic and social reasons, for economic and social reasons as a result of white flight. These communities were left with limited access to political, economic, and educational opportunities. So rather than using inner city and urban, we could use terms like city center, downtown, when using the geographic context, or under-resourced or low income when referring to neighborhoods of communities with high poverty rates. Let's see. We could dive into these topics a lot deeper by reading the cases, which I encourage you to do. But we're not going to cover it here in this class, but I encourage you to read this flyer online and really take it to heart. Type of micro insult, ascription of intelligence, assigning a level of intelligence to a person of color based on their race. So like when we use, oh, well, Asians are good at math, or we use things like that, or we use derogatory versions of that same kind of thing, then you're crediting the description, you're generalizing and crediting the description of that group of people based on a stereotype. So you are a credit to your race. How did you learn to write so well? Those are some examples of that. Those are very uncomfortable sentences for me to utter. And so those are examples of it, but I would just kind of caution us to avoid those. Criminality, assumption of criminal status, presuming a person of color is dangerous, a criminal, or deviant based on their race or personal appearance. I ran into this just recently as well, where I had to check myself based on personal appearance of an individual. And that, and I found myself making judgments about that person and their potential qualifications of whether or not they would be a good candidate for a rental. And I had to check myself on that, and because it is an illegal act in the District of Columbia. So your neighborhood is so diverse. Do you feel safe? Are your parents legal? Using terms ghetto or thug to describe certain ethnic groups. Pathologizing cultural values, communication styles, presuming that the values and communication styles of people of color are abnormal or stereotyping. So saying things like black people are so loud, referring to a black person, his name is Dave. I thought his name was Jamal or Antoine or something. Saying to an Asian person, how come you don't like rice? I mean, even when we utter that, in this discussion, that's an uncomfortable phrase. Those are uncomfortable phrases to even utter. But we hear that every day almost, so just some things to be thinking about. Second-class citizen status, not treating people of color the same as white people, saying you people, using the phrase you people. This is a really big one within certain ethnic groups. When you use the word you people, followed by whatever you want to say, that is a massive red flag for a lot of groups. So never make generalizations and characterizing people with you people. Talking to people differently based on the race, for example, greeting a black person with sup, or changing your vocabulary or vernacular. That can be, some people may like that, but others may take offense to it. How are you? What's happening? So while greeting a white person, you would say, how are you? What's happening, right? So the difference in vernacular based on somebody's ethnicity. Behavior and conduct examples, not greeting a person of color when they enter a checkout line, but greeting the white customer. Putting a group of black people or people of color in the back of the room. or even allowing that to happen unconsciously, right? Assigning seating area in an office based on race or national ethnic origin. I don't think any of us would knowingly try to do that. But even if we subconsciously do that or allow for that to happen, I think we have some things there. So just some food for thought. I'll take a minute to see if anybody has any thoughts on this discussion. If anybody wants to offer some chat topics to discuss on this, feel free to unmute and let's chat for about, we'll take 2 minutes to do that. Anybody have comments? Nobody has comments? Well, all right.
Well, I'll just say really quickly, kind of a funny story. Years ago, I was working in the service industry, and it was Valentine's Day at this nice restaurant, and the host would arrange the tables in terms of who goes to which table before people would even come in. It was like a pre-shift thing that we did. The first couple that arrived was a Black couple, super sweet, and they were led to a table in the back of the restaurant. Still a nice table, but there's nobody else in the restaurant at that point. So I'm just leading them to the table that the managers prearranged, and they got livid. And I had no idea why. And, they're like, we need to speak to your manager, this and that. And I'm like, okay, sure. And it turns out it was simply because they felt like, because of the color of their skin, they were being put in the back of the restaurant, even though nobody else was there. And, obviously I had no intention to do this. This is what I was told to do. This is what I was told their table should go to. But now looking back on that, I mean, that was like 10 or 12 years ago at this point. But now looking back on that, again, that letting that happen, I think it's sort of like, okay, maybe there's a million other tables open right now. Maybe we shift things around, right? Maybe I go to the manager and I say, hey, instead of putting them back there, why don't we put them up at this table in the front or something like that? But
Yeah.
it is so those sort of things that we don't pay attention to or that we allow to happen that make other people feel a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think people will always remember how you make them feel above everything. So
I
just
think
my little story.
that's a fantastic example. The presumption of prejudice sometimes is more powerful than the reality of prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just the appearance of it is what will kick off a complaint against you and get the ball rolling. And more times than not, it's that innocent kind of experience that oftentimes gets the most attention because it's the presumption. And even though it's a presumption and one might ultimately win in a court of law, you still have to defend it. And that's something that you don't want to get yourselves in. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we look forward to our more and more of these educational lessons. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Take care.